Why can you remember a story someone told you 10 years ago, but you can't remember last week's slide deck? It's not because you're distracted, it's not because you're lazy, and it's definitely not because you don't care. It's because your brain is wired for story. Today, I want to show you why. Not from a motivational perspective, from a brain perspective. I've always been fascinated with how the brain works, especially when it comes to communication and influence. At some point, I started asking, why do some people command attention effortlessly? Why do some messages stay with us? Why do facts fade but stories linger? And what I discovered is this: storytelling isn't just a creative skill, it's neurologically aligned communication. Let's unpack that. When someone tells you a story about running, certain areas of your brain light up as if you're running too. When someone describes pain, your brain partially mirrors that experience. These are often associated with what are called mirror neural systems. Now, I want to be responsible here. This doesn't mean your brain is literally duplicating their entire experience, but it does mean something powerful. Story activates simulation. Your brain doesn't just process information, it rehearses experience. And that changes everything about influence because it gives you a bullet point. You process it cognitively. If we give you a story, you process it experientially. That's a deeper level of engagement. Another concept I love: neural coupling. When a storyteller and listener are deeply engaged, their brain activity patterns begin to synchronize, not in a mystical way, in a measurable way. Meaning, story creates shared mental states. That's why a powerful speech feels like we were all in it together. That is not poetic language, that's alignment. So, if you care about influence, no manipulation, no control, but meaningful influence, you should care about story because story aligns brains. Facts inform, stories synchronize. Let's talk emotion. When we experience tension in a story, our stress systems activate slightly. When that tension resolves, our reward system responds. This is why conflict and resolution are so important. Without tension, there's no emotional movement. Without resolution, there's no satisfaction. This pattern mirrors how our motivational system operates, which means a flat presentation feels flat in the brain. Anticipation, no emotional tagging, no strong memory. Story creates emotional tagging. Emotion is what tells the brain this matters. Here's the uncomfortable truth: most communication fails not because it lacks intelligence, but because it lacks structure aligned with the brain. Yeah, structure aligned with the brain. If you overload someone with information, you increase cognitive load. But if you wrap information inside narrative structure, you reduce resistance and increase retention. The hippocampus involved in memory formation doesn't just store data, it stores context, and story provides context. That's why you forget statistics, but you remember the story behind them. So, what does this mean for you? It means if you want to influence a classroom, a team, an audience, a client, even your own family, you need to think in narrative. Instead of, here are three reasons, ask, what experience am I guiding them through? Instead of, let me present information, ask, what tension and resolution does this message carry? Story isn't decoration, it's design. And I started shifting from information heavy communication to experience based communication. I noticed something. People lean in more, they remember more, they responded more. Not because I became louder, not because I became more dramatic, but because I become more aligned with how the brain processes meaning. That's influence, not force, alignment. In the next episode, we're going deeper into what actually happens in different regions of the brain during storytelling and why understanding that can completely transform the way you speak, teach, or lead. If you're someone who cares about communication with clarity and depth, this series is for you.